Good morning, and thank you for joining us today for the Plug-in NC webinar on the value of networked electric vehicle charging. My name is Lindsay Breckeisen, and I am a communications intern at Advanced Energy. Over the past few months, I have been assisting with Plug-in NC outreach and education, and I am very excited to be welcoming you all to the webinar today. Before we get started, I'd like to provide a quick overview of Plug-in NC. Plug-in NC was started in 2011 as an initiative to bring together stakeholders in North Carolina to address the barriers to electric transportation. Over the past 6 years, Plug-in NC has worked to increase awareness and support for electric vehicles and ensure that there is a seamless integration of electric vehicles into our local communities. Since Advanced Energy has been providing outreach and technical support for public charging station deployments, questions surrounding data tracking and the communications capability of charging stations have been ever present while the technology continues to evolve. With more and more deployment planned for the state of North Carolina, the subject of today's webinar is the value of networked charging. For today's webinar, we have a lineup of 3 speakers. Lisa Poger with Advanced Energy will provide an overview of electric vehicle supply equipment options as the hardware has evolved. Whitney Schmidt of ChargePoint Systems will share insights on the value proposition of a networked charging station. And John Crawford with the North Carolina Department of Administration's State Parking Office will be presenting some of their real-world data on their active stations. At the end of this webinar, we will also have a short period for questions and answers. So now I would like to turn it over to Lisa Poger to get started.
Thank you, Lindsay. Hello, everyone, and thank you all for joining us. I'm Lisa Poger. I lead transportation and electrification projects at Advanced Energy and also help coordinate the state's EV Industry Outreach Collaborative, Plug-in NC. I will be presenting today a brief overview of the expanding features and functionality of electric vehicle charging systems, specifically networked versus non-networked stations. When we consider the networking and communication features of charging stations, we are typically thinking outside of the residence or home, such as public stations, fleet applications, and workplace charging. Looking at the publicly available charging stations across our state, we find nearly 1,000 charging points at more than 400 locations. Many of these having gone into service within the last 6 months, with a variety of new host site owners, varying expectations, and different market exposure needs. You can view this interactive station locator map at the Department of Energy Alternative Fuels Data Center website using the link to the right of the screen. Clicking on individual charging stations on the map will provide information about the station, the host site, and any network services provided. There are many decisions to be made when planning to offer a charging station or location for electric vehicle drivers. These decisions will be based on a number of factors, including the number of vehicles needing to be served, the dwell time of the driver, or how long they tend to park in the specified location, and of course, cost, and also your desired outcomes, whether it be drawing customers to your business or supporting your community's sustainability goals. With 3 levels of charging available, you can select the charging speed that best serves your target market. AC Level 1 charging with a recharge speed of 3 to 5 miles per hour may do well with workplace or fleet charging, where cars are parked for long periods of time. Level 2 speeds can match well with retail shopping and destination locations, while DC fast charging is ideal for en-route convenience charging. When it comes to purchasing decisions for non-residential chargers, the Department of Energy Clean Cities Organization has published a detailed study on the costs associated with non-residential electric vehicle supply equipment that outlines the factors that influence the total cost of electric vehicle charging stations. These costs include the hardware unit, which we will look at in more detail shortly, the installation cost, including contractor labor and materials, permitting fees, inspections, and engineering, and ongoing maintenance and operation costs, including electricity consumption, which will vary based on charging speed and utilization of the station, networking subscription fees, if applicable, staff management time, transaction costs if set up to receive payment, and any maintenance and repairs. A basic charging unit, or EVSE, is the interface between the vehicle and the electric power supply. It includes a power control device, a cord, and a connector. A simple charging station can contain this and nothing more. However, for even the most basic station, there are influencing factors on the cost of the hardware unit, including the charging level and amperage rating. Typically, the faster the charger, the more expensive the hardware. The number of charging ports or cords, additional cords add cost to the equipment. However, a dual cord unit may be less expensive than two single cord units for the equipment purchase and installation. Length of cord, as cords can range in length to address particular accessibility issues. And the mounting system. Depending on the installation location, a wall unit may be more cost effective. Ultimately, the DOE study found that there are many influencing factors to the cost associated with public EVSE, and that linking the right applications with the intended benefit is the key to cost effectiveness. These photos demonstrate a first-generation Clipper Creek unit that was installed at North Carolina State University in September 2010 as Raleigh's first public Level 2 charging station. This dual-cord charge point station was dedicated on North Carolina State University campus just earlier this month as part of a new network system being managed and tracked across the campus. Network stations can add communications capability, access controls, point-of-sale options, energy monitoring, and end-use management for load shaping and demand response. Additional features might include advanced display screens, retractable cords, and automated diagnostics. In summary, this image developed by New West Technologies for the DOE Clean Cities report to show the wide range of vehicle features and functionality of the EVS offerings show that some features are better suited for particular applications than others, depending on the needs and the desired outcomes of the host site provider. Just to note, the ballpark ranges for the hardware reported here are for years 2013 to 2015. However, they are still consistent with EVS hardware prices today. Finally, Advanced Energy published a study on Level 2 public charging station usage in North Carolina during early adoption that looked at how station data was collected and the goals and observations of host site owners. Of the participating host sites, a majority indicated that the primary goal for installing a charging station was to promote electric vehicle adoption and provide an amenity for visitors or employees. Yet less than half collected data on a regular basis to support that objective. As the communication and connectivity of the EVSE infrastructure continues to advance, there appears to be a significant opportunity to take advantage of the benefits of this new network technology. Next, we will hear from Whitney Schmidt on the features and benefits of the ChargePoint network system.
Thank you, Lisa. I appreciate that. I'm Whitney Schmidt with ChargePoint. I'm the Director of Infrastructure for the Carolinas and Tennessee. And I want to tell you kind of a networking story first, and then we'll get into some of this. A couple of years ago, a small entity in a county north of Durham came to us and said they wanted to install charging stations. I looked at the number of electric vehicles in that county at the time, and there were fewer than 5 registered in that county. And I was concerned. I thought that this could be potentially a disaster for them from a cost recovery or program success standpoint. But we installed the stations. They were adamant. And 6 months passed, and I pulled the analytics. And let me show you what I found. These are 2 maps. The one on the right is just a little bit blown in from the one on the left. What I found was that 82% of charging sessions, and there were between 1 and 3 per day, over a 3-month period, were from out of the county. The farthest points that drivers were domiciled and coming from were Quebec, Lancaster, Wisconsin, and Fort Lauderdale, Florida. These points on the map represent the EV driver's home that was using this charging station. So let me show you this is the cross-section of data points that tell us that. You can see there's a lot of data here. But if you look at this postal code location, you can see that the data tells us that EV drivers are not just coming from close to that station, which is what we had originally thought would probably happen. They are coming from all over the place. And indeed, if you look at the patterns over a period of a year or so, they are typically coming up and down 95 and pulling over at these charging stations and charging their vehicles, which means they are also eating there, they are shopping there, they are staying in hotels there while they charge. So it's important to understand here, too, that networking is important because we're in the initial changes of a transportation economy shift. And we think it's going to be a really big shift. It's going to be evolutionary. The way we get around is changing, and automakers like Volvo are saying we did gasoline for 100 years or so, and that was terrific, but we think we're going to go electric now. And you've seen probably Volvo's commitment to all electric by 2020. Volvo is not the only stakeholder making this kind of commitment. And Volvo, one thing that's interesting about that, is not owned by Swedes. Volvo is owned by a Chinese company called Geely. And Geely is the same company that owns the London Taxi Company, which has also committed to going all electric. That is the largest taxi cab company in the UK. That is a significant stakeholder saying, we are going to go electric. So it's things like that, along with a host of other moves by automakers and other industry stakeholders, that tell us this is here, it's real. The way we drive is changing. Transportation is changing. And when you add to that the intelligent transportation component of all of this, autonomous vehicles, the fleetification of transportation, where fleets and buses and van pools and municipalities are electrifying their fleets, what we see is a trend toward an intelligence of things surrounding transportation. Networking is the internet that is at the basis of all of that. So how is EVSE used? How is electric vehicle supply equipment used? Just very basically. Well, it does one really important task, and that is it provides electric fuel for vehicles. And so some people respond just on that level. They're an amenity to attract folks to retail locations like malls and restaurants. They attract patrons, and they keep them there while their vehicle charges. They are a convenience for employees. 70 to 80% of all charging happens at work and at home, so this is important. They are part of a public infrastructure in well-planned and future-proofed communities. And they are becoming part of a public transit infrastructure with electric buses and van pools and autonomous vehicles. It's also the right thing to do. So these help achieve sustainability goals within companies and within municipalities. So given the above, some things that one might want to do with their charging station is charge a fee for parking space occupancy to cover overhead associated with the station. Attract drivers to the location, help them find the location with turn-by-turn directions in Apple or Google Maps. Connect with drivers, obtain data regarding their length of stay, frequency of stay, and as we saw in my example, where they're coming from, find out how far they've traveled to get there. Restrict access to stations for employees only or residents only or something like that. Report energy cost to city councils, boards of commissioners, other governing boards so that they know how much this station is costing in energy usage. And tracking electric vehicle consumption, electric fleet consumption, and enable fleets to charge anywhere. And then also looking forward, the future planning for intelligent transportation. And you must be looking 3 to 5 years out or 10 years out. If you're not, you're already too late. So there are 6 questions that electric vehicle charging station owners can ask themselves. Do you want to charge for use of the stations? Do you ever want to charge for use of the station? Is it ever conceivable that you'll want to recover the costs or some of the costs associated with this station? Are you interested at all in access control, as in employee only or resident only or something like that? Do you need to know how much energy your stations are consuming? Do you need internal metrology on these stations? Do you want people to know where your stations are? There are a few folks that don't, but generally the overwhelming majority wants these stations on a mapped app that can guide drivers in. Do you want to monitor your asset? Have you convinced someone to buy something and you're in charge of a program and then you need to report on how that asset is performing? Are you interested in who's using your station or connecting with drivers that frequent your station? And if the answer to any one of these questions is yes, you need a networked station. A non-networked station cannot do any of those things. So once it's connected, what does a station do? It communicates its location and availability status to the cloud and then to the world through apps. It identifies drivers. It starts charging sessions. It collects fees for charging sessions. It keeps track of data. This is a data dashboard. This is a snapshot right here that is a snapshot of many, many, many different data and analytical points that the station keeps track of and then communicates to the cloud. It monitors itself and its power status. It monitors whether or not the station is available for use and communicates that to drivers through apps so that they know when they are coming in if that station is available. If it's not available, they can get in line for that station. It can load shed, it can schedule charging, it can reduce power to avoid demand charges depending on peak power curves, and it can monitor those power curves and power consumption. And this is especially important in the very quickly emerging market of DC fast charging. So John Crawford is on the phone here too as well. And I'm just going to go through a couple of analytics pages. I know that John, who is the director of state parking for the Department of Administration, John monitors his stations very closely and uses these analytics quite a bit. So here are some examples, and these are snapshots of histograms. This data in just about any network station is also going to be available in an Excel or a CSV format so that it can be sliced and diced in many different ways. This is a snapshot of the energy for the last 30 days of a particular station. It gives you the peak energy, and then there is a trending curve there, the green line that follows that. That gives you an idea of how much energy your station is using and how much it is costing you once you extrapolate the data with the rate that you're being charged. Greenhouse gas savings. This is important for sustainability plans and other data that you may want to gather. It is becoming increasingly important to employers to assist their employees in decreasing their carbon footprint. We have a lot of excellent station owners who have really great programs to assist their employees in doing that, and they're doing the right thing with their sustainability goals. Revenue. If you are charging for occupancy at your station, you are going to want to know what that revenue looks like. John, make sure you jump in here if you have something to say as well.
Yeah, I will. But you're doing such a great job. I hate to jump in on you, but the data is critical. As Whitney had mentioned, this is a transportation shift that's going on. And if we don't have the data to understand what is happening in that shift, it's going to be hard for us to set pricing models and policy models. And that's the key. You need the network capability for any of the potential things that you're going to want to do in the future, as she had said. And yeah, we do keep up with the data very closely. I keep the dashboard up in the background on my computer constantly. And then I periodically go and look at the different analytics pages. So Whitney, I mean, this data is critical, and I encourage anybody to think very, very seriously about having access to this data to make good decisions going forward.
Thanks, John. This is another piece of the dashboard. This is average session length for the period that a vehicle is plugged in. There is a lot that you can do with this piece of information. You can see that red arrow points to an average session length of 2.5 hours. Think about how you may want people parking in any particular parking lot that you manage. I know that they're at schools sometimes, particularly with EV charging, they have issues with folks parking overnight and kind of using these as their personal parking spaces. With this session length histogram, we can not only assist the station owners in monitoring how long folks are plugged in at that station, essentially whether or not they're hogging the station. But we can also use that information to inform driver behavior shaping policies that cause those drivers to want to move after, say, 4 hours. And that may be in the form of a pricing policy that assesses a fee for being there for longer than a certain period of time. It may be in the form of simply shutting power off to the vehicle at that point, or it may be just monitoring and seeing how things go if you are an employer, and then shooting that employee an email and saying, hey, our EV policy says that you have to move after 4 hours. Would you mind watching how long you're charging there? So that shapes all kinds of policies. The other thing that this can do, and we did a pretty big experiment with a retailer out in the Midwest, a very large retailer, and they wanted to know, they had an idea that for every minute you spend in their store, you spend $1, up to about an hour and a half. And they wanted the EV driver population to come into their store because they were generally families. They had a really good demographic that fit with this store. And so what they wanted to know is, if we have charging stations in front of our store, how long can we depend on having those drivers in our store? Well, we looked at it, we monitored it for about 6 months. Their goal was to have those drivers in the store for 33 minutes. Using this session length histogram and this data, we found that EV drivers that parked at their store, and it was the only store right there, there was really nowhere else these folks could go except to this store without walking quite a distance, they parked there for an average of 78 minutes. Now, we also found out that that standard deviation was fairly large because there was a Tesla that was parking there almost every night, overnight, and charging. So they did two things. They found out, and then once we took that Tesla out, it went down to 73 minutes. They found out that their dwell time increased to a point where they wanted to include these in all of their retail store plans, in all of their build and design plans. And they also found that they wanted to shut access to the charging stations off between the hours of 10 p.m. after the store closed and 6 a.m. to prevent overnight parking. So I'm going to open it up for questions. And John, also for you to make any more comments that you would like to make. I know that you look at the availability of the stations. I know that I use it for availability of the station, particularly in front of the Science Center if I am coming into town to see if I can park there, if I need to go to find another station.
Yeah, we're monitoring several items on a regular basis. Of course, the megawatts of electricity or kilowatts per hour, the total number of sessions, the revenue, because we do charge $1 per hour of connection. And I think that's very important because we're trying to see what the economic effect is on people when they have to make that decision. Are they going to charge at our public station, or are they going to charge more at home? And also the greenhouse gas savings, which is very important for your sustainability efforts. So all of those things are things that we look at very closely, and I'd be happy to answer any questions about that for anybody.
And I see a couple of questions. Before we get to them, I also want to make a comment. We've been monitoring these stations in Raleigh because they are a fee-based station relative to sessions initiated at other stations in the same general location. And what we have found is that the number of sessions initiated and the length of sessions is just about neck and neck the same. Collecting the fee for the station, and this is a question I get all the time, is not having any kind of significant impact on the utilization of the station. The utilization on all of the stations in the Raleigh area that we are looking at for this particular question is very, very high. All right, so one of the questions that I see here, and we get this question a lot, is about cybersecurity issues. If a station is connected, is that a risk? The answer is currently no, it is not. And the reason for that is that network stations use now cellular connective protocol. They are PCI compliant, which means that they comply with all security protocols in any kind of payment collecting system. And the cellular network is a firewalled, independent network that does not require piggybacking off of any intranet that may be in the host entity. It also doesn't require comms cables. So there is no Wi-Fi access required, and there is no hardwired networking required. If you think about that, bringing your network outside to a location outside of the building, that can be a risk. But with these firewalled cellular communications protocols, it is not a risk. Payment is collected behind the scenes in the same way that an Uber payment or an iTunes payment may be collected and handled that way. And then another question about different access cards. So networks have access cards or access accounts. That is true. ChargePoint also allows guest access. So if you do not have a ChargePoint account, you can still access the station through an app or on the phone if you want to do that, much like a Park Mobile. And you can do that as a guest, or you can do it as with the account, which is free. There is an association called ROEV, R-O-E-V, that ChargePoint started with BMW, Nissan, and EVgo. And ROEV's mission is to make interoperability of networked charging stations possible, much like ATMs are accessible across a variety of banking cards. That is the mission of this as well. And as we move forward with standardization of the protocols, that will happen.
All right, thank you, Whitney. We also have another question about older charging stations, and can I upgrade to collect data if you have an older charging station?
The answer is maybe. It depends. It is the answer. Well, it depends on what kind of station it is and where it came from. You can always, if the station is not separately metered, you can always drop a new service in and meter at least the energy consumption that way. You will not be able to meter who's there and how long they're staying there. It'll be just like any electric bill. You'll be metering simply the kilowatt hours going out to the station. A lot of these older stations are not supported anymore by their original manufacturers. There are many manufacturers who have exited the market, both recently and in a little bit more distant past. There are some that are still supported, particularly those stations that were on-ramped with ChargePoint prior to their exit of the market. Generally speaking, though, and I know John has found this true, it is actually less expensive to replace the station than to retrofit with networking.
Yeah, that's correct. We looked at trying to upgrade some of the old Clipper Creeks, and it was a lot more expensive than just buying new up-to-date technology.
All right, thank you, John and Whitney. That is all the time we have for questions today. We will be sending out the presenter's contact information after this webinar. Before we end the webinar today, I'd like to remind you all of the ways you can get involved with Plug-in NC. First, make sure to visit our website at www.pluginnc.com to stay up to date on our news and events. Also, there will be multiple National Drive Electric Week events occurring this September in North Carolina. We will be hosting a large event at the Research Triangle Park headquarters on Saturday, September 16th from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. For more details on that event and other events happening across the state, please visit driveelectricweek.org. And lastly, follow us on social media. We are on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Just search for Plug-in NC. Thank you all again for joining us today, and please feel free to reach out with any questions. Thank you and have a great day.